Hello, my name is Darren Thomas and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this video, we're going to get an overview of the quantitative research process, particularly as it is defined in the social sciences, but of course the ideals presented here probably apply in most situations. So let's go ahead and see what we can learn. Now, there's a lot of different terms and ideas that I'm going to be sharing at once, but I'm not going to try to define all of them. Instead, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to show you how the different parts of a research paper as defined by someone who's in academics, a research paper, how these different parts work together to share a story about what someone has learned through that experience of doing research. So that's what I want to do. One of the things I've noticed in my career as a researcher, especially in quantitative research, is excellent researchers normally really struggle to communicate what they did. In other words, the process for them is very, very intuitive and very, very natural. And for someone who doesn't have the same strong background, you're often left lost trying to appreciate whatever it is this person did with their results of their paper. So with that background, I just want to try to show you the different components of a research paper, the different components of the process and how they all work together. So research begins with a problem. And now I'm leaving this space off to the right for future purposes. It begins with a problem. That is what it is. And so how you define a research problem, again, that's beyond the details of this video. But something feasible, something you can break down, but a problem is large and it's broad. And so there are two things you have to do in relation to the problem that you're looking at in order to have success. Excuse me. One is, of course, you have to read about the problem or similar problems, how other people have addressed this, how other people have approached this, because that'll help you to uncover your gap. In other words, what you're doing that perhaps someone else has not done. And of course, for our purposes, what's really, really important when you are dealing with your problem, whatever it might be, your research problem, is you need to ask questions about your problem. This is very, very important for several reasons. Ask questions. And I'm going to put an arrow up here to show you that you're asking questions about the problem. The first reason you want to ask questions about your problem is not just because your teacher told you to make up research questions. You are asking questions because that is like the first step in the analytical thought process, where you're taking something really large and complicated, a research problem, and you're breaking it down into things that you can answer about the problem. So the problem is large. It might be like, kids are dropping out of college, drug use, kids who are not doing well in terms of academic performance. These are big, big problems. And generally in one research paper, you're not going to solve the problem. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to answer questions about the problem. And these answers that you uncover are going to help people to solve the problem. That is how it works. So the questions is how you begin to break down what you are going to do in terms of addressing the problem. That is what it is. And so I'm going to call it questions here, but you can also list objectives. That's another way of thinking about this, whatever works for your mind. Now, the next step, after you have a problem and after you have asked questions about your problem, is you need to figure out how you are going to answer your questions about your problem. And so I hope you're starting to see how everything is connected. And this is what students often miss. Students will go through all the steps, but they will not see the importance of each individual step. And so what's happening here is that everything is about the question and the problem. You begin with the problem, the questions are built off the problem, and then how are you going to answer the questions about the problem is the next step. Again, there's a term for this and I'm going to share with you in a few minutes, not just yet. Now, the next step, after you know how you're going to answer your questions about your problem, the next thing is you actually want to share the answers. You want to share the answers to your questions about your problem. That's what we're doing here. And so now you can see everything's built on the problem and the questions. You've explained what your problem is. You've explained what your questions are. You've explained how you are going to answer your questions about your problem. And now you are sharing the answers to the questions about your problem. And then the last part that you need to do as a researcher when you are trying to put together a paper is you want to try to give some sort of a meaning or interpretation to your answers about your questions about your problem. That's how it works. Excuse me. And so this is how research works in the social sciences, in that it's all about having a problem, asking questions about that, explaining how you will answer the questions about your problem, sharing the answers to the questions about your problem, and sharing the meaning or the interpretation, or you could say the conclusions about the answers to the questions of your problem. Now, these different steps have different names and terms that I'm sure you might be familiar with. So when we're talking about the problem and the questions, these two guys right here are often found in your introduction. Again, I'm assuming you already know this. That's your introduction. What you read about your problem, this is often found in your review of literature. Okay, again, I'm already assuming that these are terms that you're familiar with. So your introduction, you share your research problem, you share your questions. In your second section, your review of literature, you share, what you read about the problem. And of course, you start to point out, your contribution, if you will. That might take place in the introduction as well. How you're going to answer your questions. This is your methodology. Methodology. In your methodology, you explain how you're going to answer your questions. You explain who you get data from. You explain how you analyze it. You explain your scales or your instruments that you're using. You talk about your ethics. You start to share, this is what I'm going to do to answer my questions. The how process behind that. Your actual answers, a lot of times this is called the results section, chapter 4, if you will, of a research paper. And the meaning and interpretation part of it, this is often your discussion and conclusion. And these are all the major section of a research paper, And these all work together to share a story of your experience trying to learn something. Again, students often will just go through this process and not understand how the parts work together. They'll write their methodology, but they don't see the benefit of the methodology. They don't understand how it connects to, this is where you explain how you will answer your research questions. Many students miss that. When it's time to share the discussion and the conclusions, students will go through the process, but they don't really understand that you're trying to interpret or to share what your answers mean to your larger and broader audience. And so they do it, but they don't understand and appreciate. What we're trying to show you here is how all of these different parts work together so that you can communicate the experience you had learning about something through using the research process. This process right here that I share with you, this is maybe perhaps almost universal, especially in quantitative. In some styles of qualitative, they don't appreciate the review of literature as much because they don't want that to cloud their interpretation. But for the most part, these steps here are done pretty much by everybody. And what's happened, like I already mentioned previously, is that people who are really, really good at research sometimes struggle to explain how all these parts work together to share something. And then, of course, students, they often have no idea why they're doing it. But this is the main heart of the quantitative research process. And these are things that need to be understood by students who are going to be exposed to this. So in conclusion, we just want to share with you that the entire heart and core of the research process is the problem first, and then the questions you ask about the problem. Everything is built on these two pillars right here at the beginning, at the top of our little slide here. These guys right here, they are working together to really build the heart of your paper. If your problems and questions are terrible, your paper will be terrible. This is where people fail at, and that is in defining a problem, and then of course also being able to ask appropriate questions about that problem. This is where the struggle is at. The how and the answers and the meaning, that's kind of not that hard. But what's really hard is shaping a problem and asking questions about it. There's very specific steps to that, especially for the questions. And so this is where you have to be very, very careful. Now, the other parts, like I just mentioned, they're not as difficult to do. How are you going to answer your questions, your actual answers, and the meaning? That's not as hard. So, my name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you very much for watching, and you take care.